She took the wrong luggage at the airport. The owner was a millionaire who changed her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The airport buzzed with the noise of rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and the tired rhythm of travelers rushing home. Under the pale fluorescent lights, Mia Tran stood in line at the baggage carousel, clutching her worn leather passport holder. Her shift at the design internship had ended hours ago, but her mind was still heavy with worry. Her mother's medical bills were piling up faster than she could pay them, and her savings account was already close to empty. When the luggage belt stopped, she spotted a bag identical to hers, a black Italian leather suitcase with a single red tag. She pulled it off the carousel, sighed with relief, and hurried toward the exit as the loudspeaker announced another delayed flight. Outside, the New York winter air bit through her thin coat. By the time she reached her small apartment, her fingers were numb. She dropped the suitcase on her bed and opened it to grab her clothes, then froze. Inside were not her thrift store dresses and sketchbooks, but tailored suits, a platinum watch, and a folder stamped with gold letters. A. Vale Confidential. Mia's breath caught. She flipped through the folder, business contracts, property deeds, and even a velvet case holding an emerald necklace. Her reflection in the mirror looked terrified. Oh no, this is not mine. The name on the ID card inside read Alexander Vale, CEO of Vale Atelier, the man whose brand she had dreamed of working for since college. A millionaire, the kind of man whose face was on business magazines and billboards across Manhattan. Her heart pounded as she whispered to herself, I have to return this right now. But it was almost midnight, and the airport office was already closed. She stayed awake the entire night, staring at the suitcase as if it might vanish. The next morning, she called the number on the business card inside the folder. A woman answered in a clipped tone. Mr. Vale's office. Who is this? Mia explained the situation nervously, her words stumbling. Within an hour, a black car pulled up outside her building. 2 security guards escorted her to a glass tower downtown, the headquarters of Vale Atelier. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, steel elevators, walls lined with photographs of models in flawless suits. Mia felt painfully out of place in her faded jeans and scuffed sneakers. A man stood by the window of the top-floor office, his back to her. The skyline stretched behind him, glowing with the morning light. When he turned, she recognized the face immediately: sharp jawline, silver cufflinks, and a gaze so cold it almost froze the air. Alexander Vale. So, he said quietly, crossing his arms. You decided to keep my suitcase for a night. Tell me, Miss Tran, were you planning to sell my belongings or just the necklace? Mia's cheeks burned. No, I swear, it was a mistake. Our bags looked the same. I did not even know who you were until I opened it. He studied her, his expression unreadable. You expect me to believe that? I did not steal anything, she said, her voice trembling but steady. I just wanted to return it. No. Alexander took a slow step closer. You are lucky I am not calling the police. Then he paused, his eyes narrowing with sudden calculation. Actually, maybe I should not. Mia blinked. What do you mean? He tapped the folder against his palm. I have a proposal that might solve both our problems. Her confusion deepened. I do not understand. Alexander leaned forward, his tone measured but cold. You see, Miss Tran, I need a wife, a temporary one. Mia's heart stopped. Excuse me? Not for love, he added sharply. For business. My late father's will requires that I marry before the board meeting next week, or lose control of the company. It is only a formality, 6 months, no strings attached. In return, I will pay you $500,000. The room went silent, except for the hum of the city below. Mia stared at him, stunned. You cannot be serious. Alexander's gaze did not waver. I am always serious. And you, Miss Tran, look like someone who could use a miracle. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She thought of her mother lying in the hospital bed, the bills she could not pay, the eviction notice waiting on her kitchen table. A lifetime of bad luck and one wrong suitcase had somehow led her here, facing a man who could change everything. Alexander slid a pen across the desk. "You have 30 seconds to decide." Mia looked at the pen, then at him. Somewhere between fear and desperation, a tiny voice whispered, "What if this mistake was meant to happen?" She took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed her name. Mia stared at the signature she had just written, her hand trembling. The ink was barely dry when Alexander slid the papers away and stood, straightening his tailored jacket. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Vale," he said flatly. The words hit her like a gust of cold wind. For a moment she could not move, could not even breathe. An assistant entered, efficient and expressionless, handing her a folder labeled Confidential Agreement. Inside were printed schedules, events, and a list of household rules. It felt less like marriage and more like employment. Alexander walked toward the window, the skyline glowing behind him. "You will move into my residence tonight. There will be staff to prepare your room. We will appear together at the charity gala in 48 hours. Mia blinked. "Move in? Tonight?" "Yes," he said, not turning around. "If this arrangement is to look real, we cannot live separately. Consider it part of the contract." She nodded faintly, still numb. The elevator ride down felt endless. When she stepped out of the building, the city noise crashed back in honking cars, distant sirens, people hurrying through their own lives. Everything around her felt normal while her world had just shifted entirely. That evening, a black car picked her up from her apartment. The driver did not speak as they wound through the streets to the Upper East Side. When the iron gates opened, Mia's eyes widened. The Vale estate was a mansion of glass and stone, surrounded by manicured gardens that shimmered under golden lights. Inside, marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and a grand staircase curved like a piece of sculpture. A housekeeper greeted her politely, leading her upstairs to a large guest suite. The room looked like something from a magazine: soft gray walls, silk sheets, and a view of the city stretching forever. On the dresser sat a velvet box containing a diamond ring. A note beside it read, "Wear this in public, A.V." Mia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring. The enormity of what she had agreed to settled in. She whispered to herself, "You are doing this for Mom. Just hold on for 6 months." Oh? The next morning, the household moved with quiet precision. Staff came and went, arranging flowers and delivering breakfast trays. Alexander appeared briefly at the doorway of the dining room, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit. "Good morning," he said, his tone polite but distant. "Good morning," she managed, setting down her coffee cup. He studied her for a moment. "The first event is tomorrow evening. My assistant will brief you on how to speak to the press. Remember, you are my wife. Confidence matters more than perfection." Mia nodded. "Understood." When he left, she exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath the entire time. That afternoon, a stylist and etiquette coach arrived. They dressed her in elegant gowns, adjusted her posture, and rehearsed every possible question reporters might ask. "Smile with your eyes," the coach instructed. "People can sense fear on camera." Hours later, as the sun set beyond the city skyline, Mia stood before the mirror. The reflection staring back at her no longer looked like the nervous girl who had grabbed the wrong suitcase at the airport. She looked like someone who belonged in his world, poised, polished, but hiding a storm beneath the surface. Downstairs, Alexander waited beside a sleek black car. "You clean up well," he said with a hint of amusement. She met his gaze steadily. "I can play my part." "Good," he replied, opening the car door for her. "Because the performance begins now." As they drove toward the gala, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and blue outside the window. Mia looked down at the diamond ring, catching the reflection of passing streetlights, and wondered if 6 months would be long enough to remember who she really was. The next evening, the Vale Atelier Charity Gala glittered like a galaxy inside the Grand Aurora Hotel. Dozens of photographers lined the red carpet, their flashes sparking against a wall of champagne glasses and polished shoes. The moment Mia stepped out of the car beside Alexander, every camera turned. She felt his hand slide into hers, a gesture rehearsed for the press, but his grip was firm, grounding. "Smile," he murmured quietly. "You are Mrs. Vale tonight." She took a deep breath and smiled as they walked through the entrance together. The ballroom was a swirl of silver gowns, tuxedos, and murmured conversations. The orchestra played softly under a canopy of crystal lights. Waiters glided by with trays of wine and caviar. Alexander moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands with investors and greeting fashion editors by name. Mia followed a step behind, her heart pounding as she tried to keep her composure. Every so often, someone would glance at her curiously, whispering just out of earshot. At the refreshment table, a young reporter with a bright smile approached. "Mrs. Valley, may I ask a question for Vogue tonight?" Mia froze for a second, but then remembered the coach's advice. "Smile with your eyes." "Of course," she said. The reporter tilted her microphone closer. "Some people say your marriage to Mr. Vale was a surprise. How do you respond to critics who claim it was rushed?" Mia met her gaze calmly. "I think love does not always wait for a convenient time," she replied. "And sometimes, the right person arrives when you least expect it." "No." The reporter looked impressed. Alexander, standing beside her, glanced over with a flicker of surprise, then faint approval. The cameras caught it all, the perfect image of a united couple. Later that night, when the last toast had been made and the crowd had thinned, Mia stepped onto the balcony for air. The city stretched below like a river of gold. She leaned against the railing, her chest tight from holding her performance together. Footsteps sounded behind her. Alexander appeared, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You handled yourself well," he said, handing her one. "Thank you," she said softly. "I hope I did not embarrass you." He looked at her for a moment, his expression softer than usual. "You surprised me." She laughed nervously. "That is probably the nicest thing you have said to me since this started." He smirked faintly, turning his gaze to the skyline. "Do not get used to it." "No." For a few minutes, they stood in silence, the city breeze carrying the faint sound of traffic and distant music. Beneath the polished surface, something unspoken began to stir. When they returned home past midnight, the mansion was quiet. Mia walked upstairs, slipping off her heels. Alexander lingered by the staircase. "Tomorrow, the board will meet. They will ask about us. You need to be there." "Of course," she said. As she turned toward her room, he spoke again, his tone quieter. "Mia, too." She looked back. "Yes? Do not let them see fear," he said. "They feed on it." She nodded slowly. "I will remember that." Later, lying awake in her room, Mia stared at the ceiling, the faint city glow tracing patterns across the walls. For the first time since signing that contract, she wondered if Alexander Vale was more than the cold businessman he pretended to be. Somewhere beneath the armor, there was loneliness, something she recognized all too well. Down the hall, in his study, Alexander loosened his tie and poured a drink. He replayed the image of her calm smile under the press lights, the way she had steadied herself without flinching. Against his better judgment, he caught himself smiling. The arrangement was supposed to be business, 6 months of appearances, and nothing more. But for the first time in years, Alexander felt something shift inside him, something he had not felt since before his father's death. And he hated how much that terrified him. The morning after the gala, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Vale estate. The air smelled faintly of roses and freshly brewed coffee. Mia sat at the long dining table, staring at a stack of newspapers spread before her. Every headline was the same: Alexander Vale and his mysterious wife stun at charity gala. Their photographs filled the front pages, her smile, his protective stance, the flash of the diamond ring. The housekeeper entered with a polite smile. "Mr. Vale is in his study, ma'am. He asked that you join him when you are ready." Mia hesitated before knocking on the heavy oak door. Alexander's office was bright with morning light, the skyline gleaming through the glass walls. He was already at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his voice calm but firm. When he hung up, he gestured for her to sit. "Good work last night," he said, flipping through a report. "The media reaction is better than expected. You did what was required." "Required?" she repeated softly, the word catching in her throat. "That sounds cold." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "We agreed this was a business arrangement, Mrs. Vale. Emotions complicate contracts." She forced a polite smile. "Of course." There was a pause. Alexander leaned back, studying her. "Tonight, we will attend the board dinner. It is important. Some of the older shareholders do not believe I can handle the company. Your presence will help silence them." Mia nodded. Understood. That evening, the board dinner was held in a private dining hall overlooking Central Park. The long table glittered with crystal glasses and golden cutlery. The atmosphere was thick with polite tension. Alexander introduced Mia formally to the members, his hand resting lightly at her back. She smiled and answered their questions with practiced grace, but she could sense the skepticism behind their polite smiles. Halfway through the meal, an older man with a sharp tone spoke up. "You married rather quickly, Alexander. We were all surprised. Surely this is not a publicity stunt." The room went silent. Alexander set down his glass slowly. "My personal life is not up for discussion," he said evenly. Mia glanced at him, then at the board members. Something in her stirred a mix of pride and defiance. She straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Vale's commitment to this company speaks for itself," she said calmly. "And as his wife, I can assure you that no headline or rumor could ever replace what he has built with his own hands." The older man looked taken aback. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a few others nodded approvingly. The tension dissolved, replaced by murmurs of agreement. When the dinner ended, Alexander escorted her outside. The cold wind swept through the marble corridor. He stopped near the car, turning to her. "You handled that well," he said. "Better than I expected." Mia smiled faintly. "I learned from the best." He chuckled softly, surprising her. "Do not flatter me. It will only make my job harder." They drove home in silence, the city lights flickering past the windows. In the quiet, something shifted, no longer the stiff distance of strangers, but a fragile thread of understanding. Later that night, Mia passed by his study. Through the slightly open door, she saw him sitting alone, staring at a framed photograph on his desk, a younger Alexander with his father. His face was unreadable, the usual hardness replaced by something that looked almost lost. She wanted to step inside, to ask what he was thinking, but she stopped herself. Instead, she whispered quietly from the hallway, "Good night, Alexander." He looked up, startled. For a second, his guarded mask slipped, and he smiled faintly. "Good night, Mia." As she walked back to her room, Mia realized that somewhere between the scripted smiles and public performances, the lines between contract and connection had begun to blur, and she could no longer tell if that was a blessing or a danger. Days passed, and the story of Alexander and Mia continued to dominate social media. Their images appeared everywhere on magazines, blogs, and television talk shows. Yet inside the mansion, life was far quieter. The household moved with its usual precision, but something unspoken had begun to shift between them. Mia spent her mornings sketching designs in the sunlit conservatory. She had asked for paper and pencils, just to feel like herself again. One afternoon, Alexander found her there, surrounded by drawings of dresses and tailored suits. He paused at the doorway, curious. "You drew these?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "Yes, it is just a habit. I used to design clothes before." Her voice trailed off. "Before the contract," he finished gently. He picked up one of the sketches, a modern suit with soft lines, elegant but strong. "You have talent." Mia smiled faintly. "Thank you, but talent does not pay hospital bills." He studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Maybe it should," he said quietly, then placed the sketch back on the table and walked away. That evening, a storm rolled over Manhattan, rain streaking against the tall windows. Mia found Alexander in the library, reading by the fire. For the first time, he looked tired, his tie loosened, his hair slightly mussed. "You work too much," she said softly. He looked up. "Work is simpler than people." "Maybe that is why you keep everyone at a distance," she replied. His lips curved into a wry smile. "And you? You seem to have gotten too comfortable challenging me." "No. Someone has to," she said. "You act like feelings are a weakness, but I think they are the only thing that makes us human." He stared at her, the air thick with silence. Then he set his book aside. "You are a strange woman, Mia Vale." "Maybe," she said, smiling slightly. "But at least I am honest." The sound of thunder filled the room, followed by a brief power flicker. Without thinking, Mia reached for a candle on the table, lighting it. The soft glow cast warm light over her face. Alexander watched her for a long moment. Something in his chest tightened. The next morning, they attended a charity meeting for the Vale Foundation. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing. As they exited the building, a journalist shouted, "Mr. Vale, is it true your wife was once unemployed before the marriage?" Mia froze. Alexander's hand tightened around hers before she could speak. "My wife's past is none of your business," he said sharply. "And if you knew her story, you would understand that integrity is worth far more than wealth." He guided her through the crowd and into the car. his expression cold with anger. When the doors closed, she whispered, "You did not have to defend me." "Yes, I did," he said quietly. "You are my wife, even if it started on paper." She looked at him, her heart thudding softly. "Sometimes, I forget that it did." He turned to meet her gaze, something raw flickering in his eyes. But before he could speak, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "We will talk later," he said. That night, Mia overheard two assistants whispering in the corridor about a board member planning to expose the truth about their contract. Fear coiled in her stomach. If the world discovered their marriage was fake, Alexander could lose the company and she could lose everything. Standing by the window, she watched the city lights blur through the rain and whispered to herself, maybe this was never meant to last. But deep down, a quiet ache told her she no longer wanted it to end. 2 days later, the tension inside the Vale estate could almost be felt in the air. Alexander had been quiet since the board meeting. He spent long hours locked in his study, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and cold. Mia tried to stay out of his way, but she could sense that something was wrong. That night, as she passed the library, she heard his voice low, sharp, and angry. "If that contract goes public, it will destroy everything. Find out who leaked it." He hung up hard, the sound echoing through the hall. Mia hesitated before stepping inside. "Alexander?" He looked up, his expression tired but guarded. "You should not be here." "I heard about the leak," she said softly. "Is it true?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "One of the board members wants to expose us. If the press finds out this marriage was part of an agreement, they will strip me of my position." She swallowed. "And me?" He met her eyes. "You will be labeled a fraud. Every word you have said in public will be used against you." Mia's heart sank. "What can we do?" Alexander turned toward the window, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "We face it together. Tomorrow I will hold a press conference. You will stand beside me. If anyone asks, you tell them our marriage is real." Her chest tightened. "And if they do not believe us? Then we give them a reason to," he said quietly. The next day came gray and heavy with rain. Reporters crowded outside the company headquarters, their voices a storm of questions. Inside, Alexander stood at the podium, his suit immaculate, his expression calm but steely. Mia stood at his side, her hands trembling behind the podium's edge. "Mr. Vale," someone shouted. "Is it true your marriage was arranged for business purposes?" Alexander glanced at her, then looked out over the crowd. "No," he said firmly. "My marriage to Mia Tranvale is not a contract. It is a choice." He paused, his voice lowering. "A choice that changed my life." Cameras flashed wildly. Mia looked at him, startled by the sincerity in his tone. It did not sound rehearsed. It sounded real. Afterward, in the car, neither of them spoke. The rain pattered softly against the windows. Finally, Mia said, "You did not have to say that." He turned toward her. It was the truth. For the first time, she saw something raw behind his calm mask. Fear, honesty, maybe even love. When they returned home, Alexander paused at the front door. "Thank you for standing with me," he said. Mia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Always." Oh, that night, as thunder rolled in the distance, they stood together at the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. No contracts, no pretending. For a moment, there was only silence and something real taking root between them. The morning after the press conference, the world seemed quieter, but underneath that calm, a storm was building. News outlets were still buzzing, some praising Alexander's courage while others called it a publicity stunt. Inside the mansion, the staff whispered more than usual, their eyes filled with curiosity and fear. Mia walked into the dining room to find Alexander already reading the papers. His expression was composed, but she could see the tension in his clenched jaw. "They will not stop," he said without looking up. "The board wants blood. Someone inside leaked the document. It could have been anyone." "Do you think it was deliberate?" she asked. He folded the paper neatly. "In my world, nothing happens by accident." Before she could respond, his assistant rushed in, breathless. "Mr. Vale, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet. On the screen was a headline flashing across every major business network. "Leaked emails reveal Alexander Vale's contract marriage, anonymous source claims proof." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. "Alexander?" He set the tablet down slowly. "It seems they want a war." Within hours, the story went viral. Photographers camped outside the mansion gates, and reporters shouted questions through the iron bars. Every channel replayed clips of Alexander's speech, dissecting every word. By evening, several board members had called for an emergency vote to remove him as CEO. That night, Alexander stood in his study, staring out into the rain-soaked city. Mia entered quietly, clutching a folder to her chest. "I found this in your assistant's desk," she said softly. "Emails from a board member named Carter Winslow. He was the one who leaked it." Alexander turned sharply, his eyes darkening. "Winslow, of course. What will you do?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "What I should have done a long time ago, fight back." The next morning, Alexander walked into the boardroom, his expression unreadable. The members sat in tense silence as he laid the printed emails on the table. "This," he said, his voice calm but cold, "is evidence that one of you attempted to blackmail me and sabotage this company." Carter Winslow shifted uncomfortably. "You cannot prove those are real." Alexander leaned forward. "Try me." He turned to the others. "I built Vale Atelier with my father's legacy and my own 2 hands. I will not let greed destroy it." When the meeting ended, Winslow had resigned, and the vote to remove Alexander was withdrawn. But the victory came with exhaustion. That evening, back at the mansion, Mia found him sitting on the edge of the terrace, his shirt sleeves rolled up, the city lights flickering below. "It is over," he said quietly. "At least for now." She sat beside him. "You did what was right." He glanced at her, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "You stood by me when you had every reason not to. I will not forget that." Mia looked down at her hands. "When I signed that contract, I told myself it was just business. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling that way." Alexander reached out, gently lifting her chin. "It stopped for me too." For a moment, neither spoke. The city glowed around them, and the sound of distant traffic blended with the soft rhythm of the night. He finally whispered, "If everything else falls apart, at least I know one thing was real." Mia felt tears rise, but she smiled through them. Then maybe this mistake was worth it after all. "No." Alexander exhaled slowly, the weight of months of deception lifting from his shoulders. "Yes," he said softly, "it was." And under the quiet sky, 2 people who had once signed a contract out of desperation finally understood what it meant to choose each other for real. A week passed after the board scandal, and for the first time in months, peace settled over the Vale estate. The reporters had moved on to new stories, and the company's stocks began to recover. Yet, despite the calm outside, both Mia and Alexander knew something had changed inside them, something too deep to hide behind formal smiles or polite distance. One evening, Alexander called Mia into the living room. The lights were dim, the fireplace casting a soft glow across the marble floor. On the table rested a thick envelope. He looked unusually nervous as he spoke. "This is the final dissolution agreement. The 6 months are over. You can walk away now, free and clear." "Oh." Mia's heart tightened. "You already signed it?" He nodded slowly. "That was the deal, Mia. I do not want to hold you to something you did not choose." She looked at the papers, the same kind of contract that had once changed her life. Only this time, it felt like it was breaking her heart. "You think I want to leave?" she asked quietly. Alexander's voice softened. "I think you deserve the choice I never gave you." For a moment, neither moved. The clock ticked in the background, steady and unrelenting. Mia took a step closer. "You told the world our marriage was real," she said, her eyes glistening. "Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" He hesitated, his voice dropping. "I was never lying." Without another word, she reached into her bag and placed her old sketchbook on the table, the one she had carried since before the contract. "Then this is my choice," she said. "I am staying, but not because of the contract or the money, because you are the only thing that has ever made me feel seen." Alexander looked at her, the tension in his expression breaking. Slowly, he reached out and opened the sketchbook. Inside were designs for a new collection, suits and dresses inspired by the city lights, the rain, and the journey they had taken together. At the bottom of the last page, one phrase was written in careful ink: "The wrong luggage." He laughed softly, emotion thick in his throat. "You turned our mistake into art." "No, it was never a mistake," she whispered. The next morning, at a private fashion gala, Alexander unveiled the new line publicly. Cameras flashed as he took the stage and said, "This collection was inspired by one woman, a designer, a partner, and the reason I believe in second chances. Her name is Mia Vale." As applause filled the hall, Mia stood at the edge of the stage, tears in her eyes. Alexander walked toward her, took her hand, and said quietly for only her to hear, "I told you once that you had 30 seconds to change your life. Now it is my turn." Then, in front of the world, he knelt and whispered, "Mia, will you let this be real?" Her answer came without hesitation. "It already is." The crowd erupted into applause as Alexander rose to his feet, still holding Mia's hand. The flash of cameras painted the air in bursts of light, but for them, everything else had faded away. He looked at her with the kind of sincerity that could not be staged, not even for the press. In that moment, the contract, the lies, and the chaos of the past months all dissolved into something pure and undeniable. Later that night, the gala had ended, and the city outside glowed softly beneath the drizzle. Alexander and Mia stood on the rooftop of the Vale Atelier building, the same skyline that had once felt cold and distant, now glittering like a promise. The rain was gentle, and the sound of it mixed with the faint hum of traffic below. Alexander took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Do you remember the first night we met?" he asked. "You looked terrified standing in my office." Mia laughed quietly. "I remember thinking you were the most arrogant man I had ever met." "Oh," he smiled. "And now?" "Now I know you were just scared of being alone," she said. He exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "I was, but not anymore." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the lights reflect off the wet streets. Then Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and familiar, the red luggage tag that had started everything. It was a little worn now, but still intact. "I kept this," he said softly, "a reminder that even mistakes can lead us to where we belong." Mia's eyes filled with tears as she took the tag from his hand. "Maybe fate just needed a little help." He smiled, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "Then let us not fight fate anymore." He leaned forward, and their lips met under the rain, slow and certain, sealing a promise no contract could define. When they pulled apart, the city lights shimmered around them, and for the first time, both of them felt free. Months later, the story of their unlikely beginning became part of the Vale Atelier legend. The wrong luggage collection sold out worldwide, celebrated not just for its elegance but for the story behind it, a story of redemption, courage, and love born from chance. In interviews, when journalists asked Mia how it all began, she always smiled and said, "With one mistake that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." "Oh?" And Alexander, sitting beside her, would take her hand and add quietly, "Some accidents are not accidents at all, they are destiny in disguise." As the camera faded out on their joined hands, the voiceover closed with the final line. "Love does not need to be perfect, it only needs to be real. And sometimes, the wrong luggage carries the right heart."